Welcome to In But Not Of, a podcast dedicated to applying a Christian worldview to the study of history and culture. We're so glad that you could join us today. Welcome, everybody, to the next installment of The Counterculture, A Tale of Two Cities. Today's episode is called Setting the Stage, and one of the things I want to do is literally set the stage. I want to take you from the end of the Summer of Love right to the beginning of August 1969 as the Woodstock concert is about to be unleashed on the world. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is kind of begin in January of 1968 and look at the key events that would take place in roughly the year and a half leading up to the concert, because I think it sets a context for us and helps us to understand perhaps the context of what's going to happen around Woodstock and kind of why it helped Woodstock to become such a cultural moment for us. Well, if we go back to January of 68, so you remember the Summer of Love ended in August of 67. By the fall, October, you had the death of the hippie that took place out in the San Francisco region, the parade and things like that. So one of the things that's happening, though, as 1968 begins, is the war in Vietnam is really beginning to heat up and has really become more of a part of the national consciousness, much more than it had been in even in the mid 1960s. But in January of 68, probably the pinnacle event in Vietnam takes place with the Tet Offensive. What this does is this shocks the American people. The American people have been told by the White House previously that there was light at the end of the tunnel. The enemy had met his master in the field. Then in January 1968, Americans wake up to discover that American troops are under siege. The embassy in Vietnam, in Saigon, the American embassy, is under attack. And they see bodies all over the place, and a massive military offensive is launched all over South Vietnam. This causes many to say, I thought we were winning this thing. And I think a key event that often gets overlooked is when Walter Cronkite basically gives the public a public commentary on his disillusionment with the war. Now, this was during a time when news commentators did not do this. And Cronkite was somebody that the American people trusted. CBS Evening News, he was the anchor prior to Dan Rather, and essentially asked, what is going on here? Now, of course, today, 2020, 2021, we are used to hearing commentators give their opinions. As a matter of fact, the news often gets lost amidst the opinion of the journalist. So the American public begins to really, turn against the war. Not in the numbers that you would think, though. I mean, that's kind of a misnomer today. Many turned against the war. They'd previously been supportive, but many still encouraged the country being there and thought it was a good idea that we, fought communism in this area. But by March of 68, Lyndon Johnson tells a disillusioned nation that he will not seek re-election. And that was after a strong showing by peace candidate Eugene McCarthy and continued chaos and fighting in Vietnam. Now, McCarthy is going to be the countercultural peace candidate. He's going to, a lot of their hopes is going to rest with Eugene McCarthy. And in March of 68, things look like this could really happen. McCarthy's going to flame out pretty quickly, though. And eventually, Hubert Humphrey is going to secure the nomination, is going to run against Richard Nixon. A month later, in April of 68, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. And I don't need to tell you the profound impact that had on our country and continues to this day. So not a good start to 1968. We're 4 months in, and you can see the amount of, the number of issues that are happening here. It's also in April where for nearly a week, students at Columbia University in New York took the campus over. They were part of really worldwide student protests, but this was very famous. They took over the administration building, and many students would be arrested and beaten before the takeover was over, as they cleared the students out of the faculty area. So again, a major event here. And then if that wasn't enough, by June of 68, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So I want you to think back. I mean, 2020, you got to the point where you said, can anything more happen in this year? Well, I think in 1968, there was a similar feeling. By June, the year's not even half over, and look at the magnitude of things that had happened. The end of the summer, August of 68, we had something called the Newport Pop Festival take place. And 100,000 people show up to hear bands like the Byrds and Steppenwolf. But that is overshadowed by the Democratic National Convention that disrupted into absolute chaos. These are the scenes where you see Chicago police clashing with protesters. They're singing "We Shall Overcome" while billy clubs are striking them in the head and things like that. As the summer came to an end, you have the election of 68, November of 68, which creates more disillusionment as Humphrey is defeated by Nixon. Now, Nixon appealed to something he would later call the silent majority, and he seems to be onto something here as he is elected. One of the great comeback stories in American politics is Richard Nixon. That might be a story for another day. One of the other interesting things about 68, though, is segregationist George Wallace secured 13.5% of the popular vote as a third-party candidate. And I think what this shows is the division that was in our country in 68. 68 was called a watershed year. 2020, you hear a lot of talk about the influence of that year and how many significant things happened. But prior to that, I would argue 68 really stood out as a watershed year. And 68 ends with the Miami Pop Festival in December. Fleetwood Mac, Marvin Gaye, the Turtles, Grateful Dead. Again, about 100,000 people come to this concert. It's going to have some problems. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes because it actually is connected to what we see happen in Woodstock. So as 1969 opens, people are really looking for a reprieve. Something to, maybe our life will get a little bit better here, right? Eisenhower dies in January of 1969, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he kind of symbolized the death of the golden years, I think, of the 1950s. And perhaps that idea of the white picket fence, American dream. Certainly the white American dream, right? Also, in March of 69, we have the John and Yoko's Bed In, where you see video footage of singing Give Peace a Chance, and they're sitting in bed together. That was actually their second one, to kind of protest the war and talk about peace and things like that. And notice that the late 60s here are kind of the in years, right? We have all sorts of quote unquote ins. You have a be in, right? You have the sit-ins, you have the teach-ins, and now you have John and Yoko doing the bed in. So very much the vocabulary of this time is to be part of a group movement or a group event like this. By June of 69, the Students for a Democratic Society are essentially taken over by the weathermen. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, as Bob Dylan said, but certainly this organization goes in this direction, a much more radical agenda. July of 69, we begin to see the beginning of Vietnamization, which is Nixon's plan to gradually reduce the numbers of troops in Vietnam. Also, the concert called Newport 69 takes place in California with the Byrds, Eric Burden, Jimi Hendrix, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and Joe Cocker, and this one brings about 150,000. Newport Jazz Festival also occurs in July with special rock performances. Led Zeppelin, 10 years after, about 78,000 people. July 4th and 5th in Atlanta, we see the Atlanta Pop Festival, 110,000. Creedence, Canned Heat, Zeppelin. And then Atlantic City, August 1 through the 3rd, Three Dog Night, Janis Joplin, Airplane, 110,000. I'm bringing these up because I think sometimes we think Woodstock just happened in a vacuum. A bunch of people got together and said, let's have a big concert. What you can see here is there are several festivals happening that was really started in 67 with Monterey. The attempt to, if you make money or if you make a cultural splash with a concert, rest assured you're going to try that again. Other groups of people are going to try to replicate that. The difference with Woodstock is going to be the scope. So again, you see a series of concerts here that lead up to Woodstock. So let's take Woodstock. Let's look at the beginnings of it. How did it start? Well, it started with two individuals, Joel Rossenman and John Roberts. They meet each other. They actually lived together in 1967, and they have money. They're wealthy investors. Roberts made his money with the Block Drug Company, which was famous for developing Polydent. And together, they actually start the Media Center Recording Studio in Manhattan. They take out a public notice and say that they're wealthy investors and they're willing to invest money if bright capitalists have any idea. Well, one of them that comes forward is Michael Lang, and he was a former head shop owner in Florida. He moved to Woodstock, New York. And in this area where he lives, people like Bob Dylan, John Sebastian, some members of the band live. And he's interested in starting a recording studio. So he contacts Rossenman and Roberts, who by this time had actually, started that recording studio in Manhattan. And he asks, "What can I do? What advice would you give me?" And he tells them the ideas that he has. And he has an idea for an opening party or concert to make money for the studio. Well, after spending some time talking to one another, they said, "Tell you what, let's just skip the the studio idea. Let's just have a big concert." Now, Lang had been one of the organizers of that Miami Pop Festival that I told you about. And it was a bit of a disaster in some ways. Because ironically, Lang doesn't learn his lesson, and he is involved in the planning of Altamont, several months later. But there are police issues and some other things that happen. But he was involved with that. So their next challenge is to find a place to hold it. So they kind of cruise around, whether it's in helicopters or wherever, looking for that perfect site. They find some land in Wallkill, New York. And it's going to be turned into an industrial park. Lang isn't really impressed with the geography of it very much. It's kind of blah, to be honest with you, because that's going to be very important to him is the setting of where this thing is held. So Wallkill signs off on having a music and arts festival. It's called an Aquarian Exposition. And the idea was there'd be music playing. People would walk around and look at art and enjoy music, kind of like a musical fair. Well, they start to secure some big names like Creedence. They're the first band to commit to come. And then they get Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, who agree to come and play for the first time together. And certainly they desired to get Bob Dylan, who lived in the area, the Doors, the Stones. They couldn't get these guys, but they end up securing a lot of big names. And so groups of hippies begin to arrive in June to begin constructing the stage and amenities and things like that. Well, the town of Wallkill begins to see what's happening, and they're not real excited. They actually have a big meeting, and they pass an ordinance that says that you can't have more than 5,000 people here. Well, they had already dumped $500,000 into the site, and now Lang and some other people begin to realize that they're in a bit of trouble because they've got these bands coming, and they need to find a new spot. Initial estimates by Lang and the others was they were thinking about 28,000 people a day, or twice was what it was at Monterey. So how did they get to the property where the concert ends up happening? Well, as they were, again, in a frantic search to find a new place, looking around, flying around in helicopters, they come into contact with a guy named Max Yasgur, who owned a milk farm and basically supplied the whole region with milk. And they talk to him, and he agrees to allow them to have the concert on his land. Now, this is in Bethel. Actually, it's in White Lake in the town of Bethel. But they need to invest $800,000 more to make this happen. And by the way, they've only got about 5 weeks to do this before the concert happens. Now, the town has about 2,700 people in it. And by this time, they're getting the sense that they might have as many as 100,000 people at this concert. Now, ironically, Yasgur is a Republican who believed in freedom of self-expression, and that's why he kind of allows the concert to be held on his farm. And this is one of the many ironies that you're going to see with Woodstock and Altamont. So he agrees to have this concert. And so the next thing is, in any large event, as you can imagine, is what are you going to do about security? Well, they agree, the Woodstock organizers agree to hire the Hog Farm, which was a commune, a very famous commune. And so about 85 members from the Hog Farm show up. And let's just say they're not packing heat and billy clubs. Their idea is to, kind of just serve the public. They call them a please force, as in please and thank you. And Wavy Gravy is part of the national scene here, and he's this toothless kind of jolly hippie Santa Claus almost. And he's talking about running security, and they're coming into the airport, and this is turning into quite a circus. Well, 5 weeks is not a lot of time, and so what ends up happening is they run out of time, and they're basically confronted with the decision: do we finish building the stage for the concert, for the acts to come? Or do we nail down the ticket process, the fences, taking the tickets as people come in? Well, that's answered for them because thousands of ticketless concert goers arrive a day before the concert's about to start. Do you clear them out? What do you do? Well, they realize that they're going to build the stage. That's what they're going to do. And they also simultaneously realize that they're about to take a bath financially because they're not going to be able to collect tickets. They're not going to be able to control the massive numbers of people that they think are on their way now. And so as they're sitting there wondering if they should clear the people out, the ticketless people, they're also aware that a movie is about to be made. So again, Monterey was a movie. They basically filmed it. So the other idea they had was to film this concert. And it was said to them at the time, well, do you want to make a good movie or not? So right at the beginning of Woodstock, understand that there is an orchestrated event to present an image to the public. And this free concert idea, this decision adds to the mystique of Woodstock for a whole generation, really. And there was this constant drive to get away from the capitalist music structure, right? This music businessmen and all the rest of it. Let's just have free concerts, man. Let's just, open it up to the public. Everybody in the goodness of their nature just sharing the music. Well, the downside of this is some people had traveled 2,000 to 3,000 miles to get to Woodstock. They'd heard about it in underground newspapers and things like that. And these people couldn't even get close, yet they had tickets, while others who had no tickets were there for free. And this is, another negative that people really don't consider. Everyone, we hear a lot about the brotherhood and peace and love, but did anybody consider how this concert would impact the people of Bethel, New York? How would it impact their town? Because by the end of the concert, now numbers, this is a whole other thing. The numbers of the concert vary, but I think most people would tell you there was at least 400,000 people there, and probably more than that. So imagine today, if we look at, populations in our country, imagine the entire state of Wyoming coming down and descending upon the town of Bethel, New York, with a population of about 2,700 people. That's something that you're going to remember for a long, long time. It's just like Haight-Ashbury, this massive number of people coming and impacting this area. They're going to leave behind a massive amount of garbage and cleanup. And then the other thing that gets lost is how this impacts Maxie Asher, personally. The fact that he would be alienated and rejected by many in the town after the concert is lost. Many refused to talk to him for the rest of his life. Now, I'm not sure a cameo appearance in the Woodstock video and a wave to the crowd made up for that. Maybe it did. I don't know Max's situation very well, but there was a real fallout for him personally after this concert. So on the eve of the Woodstock concert, as people are already making their way there, you can see some themes here. And one of them, I think, is despite the best laid plans of the organizer, you can't always control something through human effort and design that is essentially spiritual. I told you geography was very important to Michael Lang, and the reason it was because he literally says he wants to turn this into something spiritual. So the demographics and the landscape is very important to him here. Of course, when we talk about spiritual, I'm putting that in quotes because this is not spiritual in the sense of traditional Christianity at all. That was not the religious underpinnings of this movement. There's actually a strong obsession with all things Eastern, and that's going to serve as the foundation for this. If you look at the lineup actually from Friday night of the concert, you can really see this. And as the counterculture was turning on, right? Many were connecting with a new cosmic awareness. And this cosmic awareness is built on the celebration of the self and the path to self-discovery. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the New Age really has its birth in the United States here. And obviously, there had been previous examples of this, but this is really going to enter our mainstream. And this obsession with self-discovery and self-fulfillment became all the stronger when so many gathered in one place to celebrate their journey in multiple gatherings of the tribes, right? That phrase, gathering of the tribes. And it's really similar to religious revivals or crusades that would be popular in our country. If you look at it, it really is very, very similar. Of course, the sacraments at this spiritual gathering are not going to be the Lord's Supper and marriage. They're going to be LSD, marijuana, and free love. But what this does do is it should remind us of the power of so many people gathering together to celebrate what they believe. Very powerful. And that's why the Bible reminds us as Christians to not forsake the gathering together of ourselves, as is the habit of some. Think about that gathering in the book of Acts that changed the whole world on the day of Pentecost. You see, as the Holy Spirit descends upon the believers that day in Jerusalem, approximately 3,000 people were converted and became believers. Now, those numbers are a lot smaller numerically than what we see at Woodstock, but I want you to think about the impact, because those 3,000 converts and believers would carry the gospel all over the known world at the time, and they would impact an incalculable number of people by extension. Acts 2:42 and beyond tells us, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were gathered together and had all things in common. They were selling their possessions and belonging and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day of those who were being saved. Well, similar in a lot of ways to what the communes tried to accomplish of the 1960s and 70s, right? But very different in other ways. And it's the differences that matter, because the question is, for what end? Why are you doing this? Now, my suspicion here is that both groups would answer that question in similar ways, but not identical ways. You see, for one, it was to celebrate allegedly brotherhood, sisterhood, togetherness. As the Guess Who sang, sharing the land, right? But really, I think if you look a little closer, for one, it was oftentimes when these groups got together, these communes, it was to pursue their self-indulgence that was often characterized and disguised as brotherhood or togetherness. Now, I'm not suggesting that there weren't real examples of this desire to live as one and some of those things, but I also think that there is a large number of these people and communes whose real purpose was to pursue their self-indulgence. And it's disguised as brotherhood or togetherness. And then we move on and we change communes, or we just change our destination as we go, because it's what we don't want anymore. That's why so many of them didn't work. So many of them failed. Many of them, and this is perhaps a podcast, a future episode, you become part of the capitalist world of the 1980s. But to the other community, the purpose of them sharing things and living together, as it outlines here in the book of Acts, it was to live out the faith in a way that would glorify their God and spread the good news. A community centered around worshiping the Creator. You see, the truth is, if people reject the true living God, then we will still worship something. Because even if we deny that we are made in God's image, the truth is, by nature, we are. And we are worshipers by nature. We will continue to worship because that's what we were designed to do. The difference is, if we don't worship the Creator, we will worship the creation. And whether that creation is a God of our own creation, an aspect of the physical world, or even ourselves, we will be revealed as the worshipers that we really are. And we can clearly see this in the counterculture and in the Woodstock generation. Well, that's all for now, folks. Next time, we will look at the concert itself, as that prepares us for Altamont at the end of the year. But until next time, remember that all truth is God's truth. And if Jesus is who he says he is, then that changes everything. We hope you enjoyed being with us today. Join us each week for In But Not Of, a podcast dedicated to applying a Christian worldview to the study of history and culture.